Hi folks, with Tacitus today, your pushback channel, and thank you for joining this audio live stream. In this essay, I'd like to talk about the subject of what is the Euro white population of Australia in percentage terms of the total population. Is it 70, 75, 80% as the globalist controlled propagandist politicians tell us? Nothing to worry about here. There's only one or two people. What's your problem? Now you fucking Nazi, racist, xenophobic, bigot, fascist. Nothing to see here. Just forget it. Or is it what your lying eyes tell you as you walk around the downtown areas of Sydney and Melbourne and you see hardly any white people? So what is it? What are the facts? There's a few things that kind of skew the numbers. There are, vast hordes of students, for example, from India and China and places like that in Australia. And given the universities mostly are clustered around the near to downtown areas, then that can sort of overrepresent the non-white people and give the appearance that there are, on a relative basis, fewer white people than you would expect to see. There's also, short-term work visa people and the equivalent of skilled work visa, horribly abused as they all are. A dishwasher, an illiterate third world IQ 70 dishwasher is not a skilled migrant, or a low IQ black chick from the dark heart of Africa that types at 15 words a minute is not a skilled, administrative clerical person. So there's a lot of abuse, and so large numbers of people are floating around under supposedly skilled work visas and not even remotely skilled by any measure. But let's just have a look at this. Now, I posted recently that the population of white people somewhere, Euro white people in Australia, probably closer to about 50%, give or take. It could be 52% or 49.5%, but around that. At the most optimistic, it would be, say, in the high 50%, 57, 58%, somewhere like that. And again, that's pretty optimistic. But when I posted that, I thought it was non-controversial. And I didn't comment, is it per se a good or bad thing? But for example, the last time, the most recent time I was in, say, Singapore, there are more white people and Singapore's, in Asia, an Asian country. There are more white people in downtown Singapore than there are in downtown Sydney. There are more white people on the public transport system in Singapore, again, in the sort of inner downtown areas than there are in Sydney, Australia. So now I'm a well-travelled guy, and I'm used to being, as I travel the world on business, I'm used to being the only white guy in the hotel or hotel foyer, the only white guy in the restaurant, the only white guy, in the building or in the shop or something. So I'm used to that. It was a bit weird at first, but over the years I got used to it. But I had to go overseas. I had to go to another country. Now I can get that exact same experience in downtown Sydney or Melbourne, which is sort of a surprise. It's also how quickly it has happened. And to give you some idea, there were always the odd one or two sort of people, foreign, non-white foreign folks in Australia. I remember, I think it was 1996, 1997, somewhere around there, the place where I was working at, the cleaning company employed a couple of Chinese, a couple of Chinese cleaners, and it was noteworthy. You look up and oh wow, okay, that was novel. It was interesting, novel, different. You just didn't see that, or not much of it anyway, and that was only less than 30 years ago, and seeing even one or two Chinese people in the cleaning crew was considered novel or unusual. So how quickly things have changed. That's just how quick it is. Now, if you see a cleaning company employing anyone other than Chinese, you're shocked. It would be the shock in reverse. If you saw a white person working as in the cleaning crew, that would be the shock. So Now, I didn't think that comments were controversial. I just thought it was a statement of the obvious, but I was equally surprised at the response. There were, the usual sort of leftist demands of they can make any assertion or claim, and that's it. You have to wear it, and if you don't like it, you're a Nazi. But as soon as you make a claim, then it's facts. You have to have 1,000 cited facts. So the burden of proof you have to meet is huge, whereas the burden of proof they have to meet is zero. And this is an attitude, or because they're so morally superior, of course. And I just didn't see it as controversial. So let's try and go over what the probable, because the government is going to tell us that they're just going to lie to us, what the probable proportions of Euro white people are, and by extension, then non-Euro white people in Australia. Do I particularly care one way or another? Well, not necessarily. I don't like it that mass migration has been forced on us without our consent, without the consent of the people. I have a problem with that. And I have a problem with the lies that they tell us that these people, the mass migrants they bring in, are all going to be well-qualified, skilled people that speak good English. That is a lie. There's many of them don't speak a word of English. Many of them have no skills whatsoever. They're peasants from out in the middle of nowhere who have no skills at all. So this idea that this claim, these lies that, we'll make sure they all speak good English, that they all have top of the town qualification, skills that are needed and most of them have never had a job in their lives. They've got no fucking skills at all, no qualifications, no credentials. They've got zip, nada, zilch, and yet they're still brought in by the gazillion. So I have a problem with the lies, and I have a problem with not the mass migration was carried on without the consent of the people, as it is in other Western countries. I mean, it's a globalist cabal gig, and that's quite clear and evident now. So here's the thing. Now, let's suppose that the government's claim and the claim of the propaganda support the government, who've made a bit of have gone hysterical over that posting that Tacitus made. They say, well, no, about 25, maximum 30% of the population is non-Euro white, and if you say anything else, you're Hitler and so on. So if that is the case, then if 70% are white, let's assume that's true for the moment, 70% are white, then I would struggle to find any train carriage in Sydney that has, say, even more than half brown people or black people. There would be a minimum half of the carriage would be white, if indeed 70% of the total population were white. So now I'll come back and drill down on some numbers in a minute, but instead I can be in train carriage after train carriage where I'm the only white person in the whole train carriage. Now, this is in the inner city where the train carriage is pretty packed out. There's got to be 100 people in the train carriage easily, and I'm the only white person. Or say on a short hop between two inner city stations, might be another one white person, two white people. So you're looking at 1 or 2% of the people in the carriage are white. If I go around the trains at times of the day when it's not as busy, when then instead of 100 people in the train carriage, it's maybe 20 people in the train carriage, then again, I'm lucky if there's even 2 or 3 people that are white in the carriage. Again, I'm mostly the only white person. I've been traveling in buses around Sydney, and when I go into the city and the inner city suburbs, I've traveled in buses where, again, I'm the only white person. If another white person gets on, it's like, oh, wow, there are now 2 of us. How can that be? If the population is 70% white, how is it possible that if I go into, say, a doctor's medical centre, and again, I might be the only white person in the medical centre. How is that? How is that even possible if it's 70% white? How can I go into government departments where the greeter at the door is a white lesbian, but everyone in the department is Indian or black? Why? How can that be? How's that even possible again in a population of 70% white? How, when the train I'm on goes past a school, say a primary school, or any school, but a primary school in particular, so the train sort of whizzes past and you can see the playing area of the school, and you can't see a single white kid in the playing area. Again, that couldn't happen if it's 70% white. So, how is it that I can walk past a CBD area where there's a lot of finance and banking people, and there's no one there who's white? You don't see any. Maybe one or two at certain times of the day, but otherwise no. That just again wouldn't be possible. Just walking through the main concourse of one of the busiest probably the busiest train station in Australia, and again, you're lucky to see any white, the odd one here or there, but pretty much all brown and black and Asian and so on, Filipino, Chinese, Indian, whatever. But spotting white people at all is a rarity. Again, how does that happen if the population is 70% white? So clearly the population is not 70% white, or that 70% white particularly goes out of their way to hide as soon as I come around the corner, which is unlikely. So what are the real numbers? Now, I did a bit of a thing here that of the population of 27 million in Australia. Because remember, Australia's a big place, but vast areas are scrubland desert, so they're not really habitable. But of the 27 million population, around 20 million live in the cities, or near, close to the big cities. Now you can look at some sort of major regional towns and even the sort of the further outskirts of the big cities, and the population there is about 7 million, give or take. So these are rough numbers. So 20 million or 19 million really are city dwellers or urban dwellers or close to urban dwellers, and the population of non-white people, let's assume the government's numbers are accurate, and I don't believe they are, but let's assume they are. So approximately 8 million, give or take, non-Euro white. So non-white people are about 8 million in the total. That's up from a few 100,000 30 years ago. So just a few 100,000 non-white 30 years ago to now 8 million non-white. That'll give you an idea of the scale of the migration, again, that's been forced on the people without their consent or agreement, and where they've been lied to about the sort of people that will be brought in and the reasons they're being brought in. All of that was lies. All of it was lies. So if we look at say, 19 million urban dwellers, then we look at the proportion of the mass migrants that live in the cities is pretty much all of them. You get the few odds and sods in the sort of fringe towns and so on. But so we can assume that of the 8 million, approximately all of them are in the urban areas. So 8 as a population of 19 million is very different than 8 million as a proportion of 27 million. So 8 million among 19 million urban dwellers, that's pushing half. So that seems closer to some sort of semblance of reality. Now, if we add to that the gazillions of students that are here, which are really, they're only coming to Australia because if they come here as students, they're pretty much banking on the fact they'll get either a long-term residency or a citizenship or something like that. And there are millions of them. And then if you add in the short-term work visa people, now depending on whose numbers you look at, this floating population of students and short-term work visas is somewhere around 4 to 5 million. I don't know. That seems like a lot to me, but let's assume for the moment it's true. So that would mean that if you add the students and so on, instead of 27 million, there's about 31 million people here. And of that 31 million, 12 million are non-Euro white. And of those 12 million, they nearly all are in the cities. So out of 22, 23 million people in the cities, if you add in the students and the work visas, then more than half of those are, 14 million, give or take, are non-Euro white. So that would be closer to it. That would mean white people are reduced to 40%, less than 40% in the cities, and that would be closer to it. I think it's even worse than that. Again, if there was approximately half or even 40% white people in the big cities like Sydney, then it would be impossible for me to travel on a train and be the only white person, or to be on a bus and be the only white person. Not that there's a handful of white people, or a third of them, or a quarter of white, but the only white person. That just wouldn't be possible. It wouldn't be possible for me to go through a busy train station, the concourse and platform, and be notice that white people are so rare that you can barely see them at all. It wouldn't be possible for me to go to a shopping centre and hardly see any white people. A busy shopping centre, I can sit at a busy shopping mall area in Sydney, and white people wouldn't even be 5% of the, and I can spend minutes sitting there, just watching the throng of people going by. As hardly any white people at all. Those things just simply wouldn't be possible. So the reality is that white people are already, I would argue, less than 50%. Now, the stinger is that nearly all, in terms of elderly people, people over the age of 70, say, then white people are overwhelmingly the majority in that category. And so when they die off, which of course they are, then the numbers on relative statistics, the numbers are going to shift even more heavily. So that I would argue in 25 years' time, less than that, white people will be about a fifth of the Australian population. Now, other propagandists sort of come chiming in to go, oh yeah, Nazi motherfucker. How come that the biggest proportion of immigrants is still coming from Britain and New Zealand? I think Britain was number one, supposedly, allegedly. Again, I just don't believe government numbers anymore. They're just so invested in telling us lies that we can't depend on anything they say. But Britain is still, the UK is still the primary or the bigger source of migrants, with New Zealand coming in third, and India is running second. Now, if indeed there are 8 million, give or take, 8 million migrants in Australia, and India supposedly has the biggest proportion, they still insist there's less than 1 million Indians in Australia, Australian citizens in Australia. So look at that, there's less than 1 million. What's your problem? There's only a few. There's only a handful. Hey, you fucking Nazi bigot. So no. Well, if there's only 1 million, and India is the biggest proportion, there are 8 million non-white, non-Euro, and the Indians only represent less than 1 million, then where do the others come from? Clearly the numbers they're giving us are false. If India is the biggest cohort, and they're less than 1 million, but there's 8 million in total of non-Euro white people in Australia, and where are the others coming from? So that's clearly nonsense, the numbers that they're giving us. Now, the other thing that's interesting is I've noticed how many Indians are in Australia who've come via the UK. So they go to the UK, spend a year or two there, because it's fairly easy just to gate crash in the front door in the UK, spend a year or two there, then they come to Australia. And so the amount of black people and Indians and so on that speak with English accents that are here, that have just come via that route. So whereas they came from the UK, but there's so many brown and black folks coming from the UK that's meaningless. So when they say, well, look at this coming from the UK, a lot of those people are not Euro white that are coming from the UK. They're just using the UK as a stepping stone to come to Australia. So The other, factor, or the other thing about New Zealand is the same. New Zealand is a stepping stone. So all the Pacific Islanders and all those brown people, it's much easier for them to get into New Zealand. They stay there for a short while, get some sort of residency permit in New Zealand, then they come to Australia. So all these Islanders and Maoris and brown people and so on, of which there's a large number, they come to Australia via New Zealand, not the white people. There are some white people from New Zealand that come to Australia, but the biggest cohort is the Islander population that again use New Zealand as a stepping stone. So looking at the numbers here, I would argue that Australia, certainly in the cities anyway, without any, you go, the further you get away from the cities, the wider it becomes. I've seen articles in local newspapers of the outer, the far outer towns of the the city fringe type thing, and these media outlets openly say that there's the air is just too white. It's too evil, fucking Nazi, white people, fascist. They have to be crushed and eradicated. That it's somehow a terrible, sinful situation that there's mostly white people in a town or a village or a satellite city or something. Why is that bad? Isn't it bad then if there are too many non-white people? Oh, no, that's good. It's only bad if there's white people in majority. What, really? Truly? I mean, for goodness sakes, who's controlling the propaganda machine here? So I would argue that in the cities, white people are probably down to about a third in Australia overall. And I'm not even sure whether that's because, again, how can you travel on a train and be the only white person on the fucking train? You can't do it if there's a large cohort of white people. Maybe white people don't take public transport anymore. Maybe they only drive their own cars. I don't know. But if indeed white people are a majority or somewhere near or close to it, then again, it would be impossible for me to be the only white person on the bus or the only white person on the train. It just wouldn't be possible. You've been with Tassos today, your Pushback channel. Thank you for listening.